On a remote mountaintop in the A Shau Valley of Vietnam, there's a solitary peak that looms over the jungle, completely disconnected from the ridges around it. The local Montagnard tribes called it Dong Ap Baya, the mountain of the crouching beast. On American military maps, it was simply Hill 937, named for its height in meters. But to the soldiers who fought and died there, it would earn a much more brutal name, Hamburger Hill. In May of 1969, this isolated mountain became the stage for one of the most savage and controversial battles of the Vietnam War. On one side stood the elite 101st Airborne Division of the United States Army, the Screaming Eagles, a force backed by overwhelming air power and artillery. On the other, dug deep into the mountain itself, were the soldiers of the 29th Regiment of the People's Army of Vietnam, or PAVN. For 11 hellish days, American forces threw themselves at the mountain in one brutal assault after another, 11 in total. And for 11 days, a vastly outnumbered North Vietnamese force, estimated at around 600 to 800 soldiers, pushed them back time and time again. This wasn't just a battle of men, it was a clash between modern firepower and ancient-looking fortifications, between raw courage and an almost immovable resolve. The question that echoed from the blood-soaked slopes of Hill 937 all the way to the U.S. Congress was simple. How could a small, isolated garrison withstand the full might of an American airborne division for so long? The answer wasn't on the surface of the mountain, but buried deep inside it, in a lethal network of tunnels and bunkers designed to turn the jungle itself into a weapon. This is the story of how a small band of soldiers inflicted a strategic and psychological defeat on a superpower, a defeat that would change the very course of the war. Section 1. The strategic chessboard. To understand the ferocious fight for Hill 937, you first have to understand the A Shau Valley. By 1969, this 45-kilometer-long valley, pushed right up against the Laotian border, had become a critical artery for North Vietnam. It was a key infiltration route from the Ho Chi Minh Trail, a logistical superhighway the PAVN used to move troops and supplies into South Vietnam. For years, American and South Vietnamese ARVN forces had launched operations into the A Shau, like Operations Delaware and Dewey Canyon. These sweeps found supply caches and inflicted casualties, but they never managed to kick the PAVN out for good. The North Vietnamese had controlled the valley since overrunning a U.S. Special Forces camp there in 1966, and they had no intention of leaving. In the spring of 1969, the U.S. launched a new, much larger offensive, Operation Apache Snow. The mission was ambitious: sweep the valley, keep the PAVN off balance, and stop them from launching attacks on coastal cities like Hue, as they had during the Tet Offensive the year before. The force they gathered was formidable. At its core were 3 battalions from the 101st Airborne Division's 3rd Brigade, the 3 187th Infantry, known as the Rakkasans, the 2 501st Infantry, and the 1 506th Infantry. They were supported by the 9th Marine Regiment, the 5th Cavalry, 2 RVN battalions, and 10 batteries of artillery, an army built for maximum pressure. The commander of the 101st, Major General Melvin Zayas, wanted to find and destroy the enemy. His attention and that of his subordinate, Colonel Joseph Conmee, quickly zeroed in on Hill 937. It stood alone, dominating the northern part of the valley. Intelligence reports pointed to a significant PAVN unit in the area, the 29th Regiment. Known as the Pride of Ho Chi Minh, this was a battle-hardened unit, veterans of the brutal street fighting in Hue during Tet. They weren't a guerrilla force that would just melt away. They were professional soldiers who were ordered to make a stand. The commander of the 187th, Lieutenant Colonel Weldon Honeycutt, nicknamed Blackjack, was an aggressive officer determined to hit the Pavan before they could slip back into their sanctuaries in Laos just over a mile away. His battalion would be the first to assault the mountain directly. What Honeycutt and his superiors didn't fully grasp, however, was what was waiting for them. The Pavan hadn't just occupied the hill, they had transformed it into a fortress. Section 2. The Fortress on the Mountain. The crouching beast was more than just a mountain. It was a death trap. For months, the soldiers of the Pavan 29th Regiment had been preparing for this exact moment. Using the natural cover of double and triple canopy jungle, thick bamboo, and waist-high elephant grass, they had engineered a sophisticated, multi-layered defensive system. The mountain was honeycombed with an extensive network of tunnels, connecting hundreds of concealed bunkers and fighting positions. These weren't just simple foxholes. The bunkers were built with logs and covered with deep layers of earth, making them nearly invulnerable to anything but a direct hit from the heaviest bombs. They were positioned in mutually supporting locations, creating interlocking fields of fire. If you attacked one bunker, you'd immediately draw machine gun, rocket, and mortar fire from several others. This concentric design meant that even if one position was taken, the attackers would find themselves in the crosshairs of the next. The jungle floor was seeded with mines and booby traps, while hidden spider holes allowed individual soldiers to pop up, fire on advancing troops, and vanish back underground. The Pavan soldiers were disciplined and well-equipped, armed with heavy machine guns, rocket-propelled grenades, RPGs, and mortars, and they used them with deadly precision. But their real tactical genius was their patience. They would let American artillery and airstrikes hammer the mountain, weathering the storm deep inside their bunkers. Then, just as the American GIs began their exhausting climb up the steep, muddy slopes, believing the defenders had been wiped out, the Pavan would emerge and unleash a devastating wall of fire. This entire system was designed to neutralize America's greatest advantage, its technology. The thick jungle canopy made spotting the bunkers from the air almost impossible. The steep, narrow ridges funneled attacking companies into predictable kill zones. Helicopters struggled to find safe landing zones, to bring in reinforcements or evacuate the wounded. In short, the Pavan had turned the mountain itself into their primary weapon. They created a battlefield where American air power was blunted and the fight would be decided on the most primitive terms, by infantrymen climbing a hill, fighting an enemy they often couldn't even see. Section 3. The inciting incident and first assaults. Operation Apache Snow kicked off on May 10, 1969. A swarm of 65 Huey helicopters descended into the Aishau Valley, dropping 1,800 men from the 101st Airborne and their ARVN allies into a series of landing zones. At first there was little contact, but on May 11th, as companies from Lieutenant Colonel Honeycutt's 180th Infantry began to probe Dong Abia, the crouching beast stirred. Near the summit, Bravo Company ran into heavy resistance. Honeycutt called in Cobra gunships for support, but in the chaos and dense jungle, the Cobras mistook the battalion's command post for an enemy position and attacked. This friendly fire incident killed 2 American soldiers and wounded 35, including Honeycutt himself, disrupting command and forcing a withdrawal for the night. The battle for Hamburger Hill had begun with a tragic mistake, but it also confirmed a substantial enemy force was waiting. Over the next 2 days, Honeycutt tried to maneuver his companies for a coordinated attack, but the terrain itself fought back. The slopes were steep and slick with mud, and the jungle was a nearly impassable wall of vegetation. On May 14th, the first major multi-company assault was launched. The Rakkasans of the 3,187th started their push up the slopes and were almost immediately cut down. Hidden bunkers erupted with machine gun and RPG fire, forcing the Americans to scramble for cover. The attack was repelled with heavy casualties. 12 Americans were killed and another 80 were wounded. May 15th saw a brutal repeat. The 3,187th threw themselves at the hill again, and again they were beaten back. An Associated Press reporter, Jay Sharbutt, had arrived and described the fight as a meat grinder, a name that was already a grim reality for the men on the ground. It was clear this was no ordinary fight. The Pavan weren't retreating. They were dug in. They were resisting fiercely, and they seemed to be getting reinforcements from Laos. 3 days of infantry assaults, backed by bombs, artillery, and napalm, had failed. For the American soldiers, a nightmare cycle was just beginning. Climb, get cut down, retreat, and get ready to do it all over again. Section 4. The Meat Grinder. The days that followed blurred into a monotonous hell. The battle for Hill 937 settled into a grinding, brutal rhythm. Each day started with a deluge of American firepower. Artillery batteries pounded the summit. Fighter jets dropped hundreds of tons of bombs and napalm, stripping the jungle away, leaving the mountains scarred and black. From a distance, it seemed impossible for anything to survive. But deep in their bunkers, the Pavan soldiers endured. Then came the infantry. The battered but relentless companies of the 3,187th would start their climb from the north, while elements of the 1,506th attacked from the south. They pushed through a landscape of splintered trees, tangled bamboo, and the ever-present red mud, made slick by torrential rains that swept through the valley. As they advanced, they were met by the same disciplined, deadly fire from the Pavan bunkers. The crack of AK-47s, the thud of mortars, and the whoosh of RPGs filled the air. May 18th marked a climax of desperation and bloodshed. Colonel Conmee ordered a coordinated 2-battalion assault. Delta Company of the 3,187th fought its way to within 75 meters of the summit. They were on the verge of taking the hill when a final, furious volley from the defenders shattered their charge. The company took horrific casualties, with every single one of its officers killed or wounded. Just as other units tried to maneuver for a final push, a massive thunderstorm erupted, ending the day's fight. The losses were staggering. By this point, some companies had sustained casualty rates as high as 80%. Morale plummeted. Soldiers openly questioned the sanity of repeatedly throwing themselves against this fortress. One wounded soldier bitterly told reporter Jay Sharbutt, "Blackjack won't stop until he kills every one of us." There were reports of some men in Bravo Company, exhausted, traumatized, and having borne the brunt of the fighting, refusing to make another assault. It wasn't cowardice. It was the result of being chewed up by the meat grinder for days on end, with the summit seeming no closer. Major General Zayas now faced a serious problem. He considered calling off the attack because of the heavy losses and the negative media attention. But with backing from his superiors, including General Crichton Abrams, the overall commander of U.S. forces in Vietnam, Zayas doubled down. He decided to commit 3 fresh battalions to the fight. The battle for Hamburger Hill had become a matter of military pride. The mountain had to be taken no matter the cost. Section 5. The final push and the cost. With the decision made to take the hill at all costs, the Americans gathered an overwhelming force. 2 fresh battalions, the 2501st Infantry and the ARVN 2nd Battalion of the 3rd Regiment, were airlifted to the mountain's base on May 19th. They joined the weary men of the 187th and a 506th for a massive 4-battalion assault. The morning of May 20th began with the most intense bombardment of the entire battle. For 2 hours, Air Force jets pounded the summit. For 90 minutes, 10 artillery batteries unleashed a torrent of high explosives, firing nearly 20,000 rounds over the course of the engagement. In total, U.S. forces dropped over 2 million pounds of bombs and nearly 300,000 pounds of napalm, incinerating what little was left on the mountain. At 11:00 a.m., the attack began. The 4 battalions stormed the mountain from different directions. The South Vietnamese ARVN battalion actually reached the crest first around 10 a.m., but was ordered to withdraw. Shortly after, around noon, elements of the 187th, the same battalion that had bled on these slopes for 11 days, finally broke through the last Pavin defenses and reached the top. The fighting wasn't over. It continued for hours as American and South Vietnamese soldiers cleared the last of the bunkers, rooting out the few defenders left behind to make a final stand. By 5 p.m., after 11 days of brutal combat, Hill 937 was officially secured. The cost of this victory was astronomical. Official records show American casualties stood at 72 killed and 372 wounded. South Vietnamese forces suffered 31 killed. On the mountain, the Americans counted 630 North Vietnamese bodies, many discovered inside the collapsed tunnel complex. But the true Pavin casualty number will never be known. Countless others were likely buried in collapsed bunkers or carried away by their comrades into Laos. The 101st Airborne had paid an immense price in blood for a 937-meter-high piece of land. The soldiers who took the hill were exhausted. One trooper found a piece of cardboard and tacked it to a blasted tree trunk. On it, he wrote the battle's nickname, Hamburger Hill. Another soldier scrawled a question below it, a question that was now on everyone's mind. Was it worth it? Section 6. The Empty Victory. The answer to that soldier's question came just days later. On June 5th, American forces abandoned Hamburger Hill. Having searched the mountain, they were ordered to continue their mission elsewhere. Within a month, the North Vietnamese army had quietly reoccupied the summit. The hill, for which so much blood was shed, was given up without a fight. That decision turned a costly tactical victory into a massive strategic and political disaster for the United States. The battle, heavily covered by the press, caused a firestorm of controversy back home. By 1969, public support for the war was already fragile. The Tet Offensive had shattered any illusion of a quick victory, and Hamburger Hill seemed to symbolize the entire war's futility, a meat grinder that produced nothing but casualties. On the floor of the U.S. Senate, Senator Edward Kennedy gave a blistering speech, calling the battle senseless and irresponsible. "American boys are too valuable," he declared, "to be sacrificed for a false sense of military pride." The outrage grew when on June 27th, Life magazine published the portraits of 241 American servicemen killed in a single week in Vietnam. Though only 5 of those men had died at Hamburger Hill, the public wrongly associated all the faces with the battle, creating a devastating portrait of the war's human cost. So how did an estimated 600 soldiers repel a modern army 11 times? They did it by refusing to break. For 11 days, Through sheer tenacity and brilliant use of their mountain fortress, the PAVN 29th Regiment forced the U.S. military into a battle of attrition on the worst possible terms. They turned back assault after assault, inflicting heavy casualties and turning a simple mission into a bloody siege. While they ultimately lost the ground, their fierce resistance won a far more important victory. They exposed the flawed logic of America's strategy to a weary public. The victory at Hamburger Hill was so costly and ultimately so pointless that it forced a fundamental change in U.S. war policy. In the direct aftermath, President Richard Nixon announced the first major troop withdrawals, and General Abrams was ordered to avoid such high-casualty battles in the future. The men on Dong Ap Bia didn't win in a traditional military sense. They didn't hold the hill forever, but by making the price of that hill unacceptably high, they defeated their enemy's will to fight that kind of war. They proved that even against a superpower, victory can be measured not just in territory gained, but in the political shock waves from bloodshed for a patch of ground that in the end meant nothing. The Battle of Hamburger Hill is a stark reminder of the incredible complexities and costs of war. If you found this story of resistance and its far-reaching consequences compelling, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into military history. And let us know in the comments what other moments in history you'd like to see covered. The legacy of Hamburger Hill is complicated. For the American soldiers who fought there, it was a testament to their bravery and endurance under impossible conditions. They did exactly what was asked of them, climbing that hill day after day. For the North Vietnamese, it became a symbol of their unyielding resolve, a battle where they stood their ground and changed the political landscape. And for the American public, it became the ultimate symbol of the Vietnam War's agonizing futility. The battle didn't end the war, but it marked the end of an era. It poisoned the national will to keep fighting and accelerated the Vietnamization of the conflict, shifting the burden of combat to the South Vietnamese as America began its long, painful withdrawal. In the end, the most enduring victory on Hamburger Hill belonged to the soldiers who, by losing the battle, helped win the argument.